Maria Santos had always been different from the other recruits at the military training facility. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she looked more like a college student than a future elite marksman. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made her an easy target for the jokes and comments that echoed through the barracks every evening. "Hey, Tiny, you sure you can even lift that rifle?" Sergeant Rodriguez would call out during morning drills, causing the other trainees to snicker. Maria would simply nod and continue with her exercises, her jaw set in determination. She had heard it all before, comments about her size, her gender, her supposed weakness. But what they didn't know was that Maria had been shooting since she was 8 years old, learning from her grandfather who had served as a sharpshooter in the military decades earlier. Growing up in a small farming town in Texas, Maria had spent countless hours in the fields with her grandfather, learning not just how to shoot, but how to read wind patterns, calculate distances, and most importantly, how to remain perfectly still for hours at a time. Her grandfather had taught her that being a sniper wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about patience, precision, and the ability to become invisible. The other recruits came from different backgrounds. Most were men who had played sports in high school, worked construction jobs, or had grown up hunting. They were used to being the strongest person in the room, the fastest runner, or the loudest voice. Maria represented everything they thought didn't belong in their world of military precision and combat readiness. During physical training sessions, Maria struggled with some of the strength-based exercises. She couldn't do as many push-ups as the men, couldn't carry the heavy equipment packs as easily, and often finished last in running drills. This only added fuel to the mockery she faced daily. Comments like, "Maybe you should try the kitchen instead," and "This isn't a place for little girls" became routine background noise in her training experience. But when it came to marksmanship training, something different happened. Maria's scores were consistently higher than average, though not extraordinarily so during the basic rifle training. She was careful not to show her full capabilities too early, remembering her grandfather's advice about the importance of observing and learning before revealing your true strength. The training instructors noticed her quiet competence but were influenced by the general atmosphere of doubt surrounding her abilities. Even when she performed well, her achievements were often attributed to luck rather than skill. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day," one instructor commented after she hit a particularly difficult target during a windy afternoon session. Maria's roommate, Jennifer Walsh, was one of the few people who didn't participate in the constant teasing. Jennifer had her own struggles. She was from a wealthy family and faced accusations of buying her way into the program. The two women formed an unlikely friendship, supporting each other through the daily challenges of training and the social isolation they both experienced. During evening hours, while other recruits gathered in groups to joke and bond, Maria would often be found alone, reading military strategy books or cleaning her equipment with meticulous care. She studied ballistics tables, weather patterns, and memorized the specifications of different rifle systems. Her dedication was seen as antisocial behavior rather than professional preparation. The training facility was located in a desert environment that provided various terrain challenges, from flat, open ranges to rocky hillsides and urban simulation areas. The recruits were exposed to different shooting scenarios. Maria excelled in the more complex environments where factors like wind speed, elevation changes, and moving targets came into play. However, these successes were often overshadowed by her struggles in other areas of training. One particularly difficult day occurred during a team-building exercise, where recruits were required to work together to complete various challenges. Maria's team, led by a recruit named Thompson who had been particularly vocal about his doubts regarding her abilities, deliberately excluded her from key planning discussions. When their team performed poorly, Thompson publicly blamed Maria's obvious inexperience for their failure. That evening, Maria sat alone outside the barracks looking up at the star-filled desert sky. She thought about her grandfather's words. "The best snipers are invisible not just to their targets, but to everyone around them. Let them underestimate you, Misha. It will be their mistake, not yours." Her grandfather had been a legendary sniper during his military service, though few people knew about his achievements. He had taught Maria that true skill wasn't about showing off or proving yourself to others. It was about being ready when the moment that mattered most finally arrived. He had also taught her that the greatest victories often came after the deepest struggles. As the weeks of basic training continued, the mockery became more subtle, but no less present. Eye rolls during briefings, purposeful exclusion from informal study groups, and whispered comments about whether she would make it through the program became part of Maria's daily reality. But with each passing day, she was also learning more about her fellow recruits, their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their assumptions about what made a good soldier. The training program was designed to prepare recruits for various specialized roles within the military's precision shooting units. Only the top performers would advance to the elite sniper school, where the real challenges would begin. Most recruits were focused on the immediate competition with each other, trying to stand out and prove their worthiness for selection. Maria, however, was playing a longer game. She was studying not just the technical aspects of marksmanship, but the psychology of warfare, the history of successful sniper operations, and the mental disciplines required for extended missions. While others were concerned with daily rankings and immediate recognition, she was preparing herself for challenges that hadn't even been introduced yet. The foundation was being laid for something extraordinary, though none of her fellow recruits could have imagined what was coming. The advanced training phase began with a harsh reality check. Half of the original recruits had already been eliminated from the program, sent to other military specializations that better matched their abilities. Those who remained faced increasingly complex challenges that tested not just their shooting skills, but their mental toughness and ability to perform under extreme pressure. Maria had quietly survived the cuts, though several instructors had questioned whether she belonged in the program. Her physical fitness scores were still below average, and her quiet demeanor was often mistaken for lack of confidence. However, her marksmanship scores had begun to attract some attention, even if that attention came with skepticism. The new training facility was located in a mountainous region that provided realistic simulation of various combat environments. Recruits were introduced to advanced rifle systems, long-range ballistics calculations, and complex mission planning procedures. The training days now began before dawn, and often extended well into the evening hours. Instructor Captain Davis, a veteran sniper with over 15 years of field experience, had taken over the program. Unlike the previous instructors, Davis was more interested in results than appearances. He had seen enough combat to know that success in the field depended on factors that couldn't be measured during standard physical fitness tests. "Listen up, recruits," Captain Davis announced during their first briefing. "Everything you thought you knew about this job is probably wrong. This isn't about being a tough guy or showing off your shooting skills. This is about becoming invisible, thinking like your enemy, and making shots that others can't even imagine attempting. Size, gender, background, none of that matters when you're lying in position for 18 hours waiting for a target to appear." The training now included extended field exercises, where recruits had to remain in hidden positions for hours at a time, dealing with changing weather conditions, fatigue, and the constant mental pressure of maintaining perfect focus. These exercises revealed new aspects of each recruit's capabilities and limitations. During one particularly challenging exercise, recruits were required to establish concealed positions in rocky terrain and engage targets at distances exceeding 800 yards. The targets appeared randomly throughout a 12-hour period, and recruits had to be ready to engage at any moment while remaining completely undetected by roving instructors acting as enemy patrols. Maria had chosen a position among a cluster of boulders that provided excellent concealment but required her to remain in an uncomfortable prone position for the entire exercise. While larger recruits struggled to find adequate cover, Maria's small frame allowed her to disappear completely into spaces that others couldn't effectively use. Thompson, who had continued to be vocal about his doubts regarding Maria's abilities, had selected a position that offered more comfort but less concealment. As the hours passed, he grew increasingly restless and made small movements that would have been easily detected by enemy observers in a real combat situation. When targets began appearing, the differences in preparation and patience became obvious. Maria's first shot came after 7 hours of waiting. When a target appeared at nearly 1,000 yards in challenging wind conditions, she had been tracking wind patterns throughout the day, noting how the gusts moved through the canyon below and affected the vegetation at different elevations. Her shot was perfect. The target dropped immediately, and the electronic scoring system confirmed a center mass hit. Around the training area, other recruits were missing targets at shorter ranges, some because they hadn't properly calculated wind drift, others because they had grown impatient and weren't taking the time to ensure perfect positioning before firing. Over the following hours, Maria engaged 6 more targets, hitting each one with precision that surprised even Captain Davis. Her shots came from positions that seemed impossible, angles that other recruits claimed couldn't provide clear lines of sight, and ranges that pushed the limits of the equipment they were using. Thompson managed to hit only 2 targets during the same period, and both shots required multiple attempts. His frustration was visible to the instructors monitoring the exercise, and his position was discovered by a patrol simulation, resulting in his elimination from the exercise. That evening, during the debrief session, Captain Davis reviewed each recruit's performance without revealing individual scores. However, he made a point that everyone understood was directed at the group's overall attitude toward certain members. Today, one of you performed at a level that would be considered exceptional, even for experienced snipers in the field, he announced. This person demonstrated patience, precision, and adaptability that can't be taught through standard training methods. Meanwhile, several others who have been considered top performers showed fundamental weaknesses that would get them killed in actual combat situations. The room was silent as recruits tried to figure out who Captain Davis was referring to. Most assumed he was talking about Jenkins, a former college athlete who had consistently scored well on previous exercises, or perhaps Martinez, who had prior military experience and often led group discussions. Maria sat quietly in the back row, making notes about the day's lessons and planning improvements for future exercises. She had learned from her grandfather that recognition often came with unwanted attention, and unwanted attention could interfere with the mental focus required for consistent performance. After the briefing, Jennifer approached Maria outside the building. "That was you, wasn't it?" she asked quietly. "Those perfect shots today, that was your work." Maria simply smiled and continued walking toward the dormitory. She had made a decision early in training to let her performance speak for itself, rather than seeking credit or engaging in the competitive atmosphere that dominated most interactions between recruits. The next phase of training introduced night operations, urban environments, and moving targets. These exercises required different skills and presented new challenges that leveled the playing field somewhat. Recruits who had excelled in static, long-range shooting now struggled with the dynamic requirements of engaging targets in limited visibility conditions. Maria's background hunting with her grandfather in various weather conditions and times of day proved invaluable. During night exercises, she had learned to read shadows, interpret sounds, and most importantly, how to remain calm and focused when visibility was limited and conditions were constantly changing. During a particularly complex urban simulation, recruits were required to engage targets while avoiding civilian areas and dealing with multiple levels of buildings that created complex ballistic challenges. The exercise was designed to simulate the type of precision shooting required in modern military operations where collateral damage was unacceptable, while other recruits struggled with the calculations required for shooting at steep angles and through narrow windows. Maria demonstrated an intuitive understanding of urban ballistics that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Her shots were not only accurate but showed an understanding of how to use the urban environment to remain concealed while maintaining effective fields of fire. The gap between Maria's performance and that of her peers was becoming impossible to ignore, though many still attributed her success to luck or favorable conditions rather than superior skill and preparation. This skepticism would soon be tested in ways that none of them could anticipate. Captain Davis was beginning to recognize that he had encountered something rare, a natural sniper whose abilities went far beyond what could be developed through standard training programs. However, he also knew that the most challenging tests were still ahead, and that true capability could only be proven under the most demanding circumstances. The urgent briefing came at 0300 hours on a cold Tuesday morning. Maria was awakened along with the other senior recruits by the sharp sound of boots in the corridor. and the harsh glare of emergency lighting flooding the dormitory. Captain Davis's voice cut through the confusion with military precision. "Full gear, conference room, 5 minutes. This is not a drill." The atmosphere in the briefing room was unlike anything the recruits had experienced during their training. Senior military officials were present, including Colonel Harrison, the base commander, and several personnel Maria didn't recognize, but whose bearing suggested special operations backgrounds. Large tactical maps covered the walls, and multiple computer screens displayed real-time satellite imagery. Colonel Harrison stepped forward to address the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified. An overseas situation has developed that requires immediate specialized intervention. Due to operational security constraints, I can only provide limited details. But you need to understand that this is a real-world mission with actual consequences." The room fell completely silent. These recruits had spent months training for hypothetical scenarios, competing against each other in controlled exercises. The sudden shift to genuine military operations created a tension that none of them had experienced before. Intelligence sources have identified a terrorist cell operating from a compound in a mountainous region. This cell has been responsible for multiple attacks against civilian targets and is planning additional operations that could result in significant casualties. Traditional military approaches are not feasible due to the terrain and the presence of civilians in the surrounding area. Captain Davis activated a wall-mounted display showing detailed topographical maps and satellite photographs. The compound was located on a hillside, surrounded by rocky terrain that provided natural defensive positions. Multiple buildings were visible, along with evidence of sentries and defensive preparations. "The mission parameters are specific and non-negotiable," Colonel Harrison continued. 12 high-value targets have been identified within the compound. These individuals must be neutralized simultaneously to prevent escape or retaliation against civilian populations. The operation must be completed within a limited time window, and absolutely no collateral damage can be tolerated. Maria studied the displayed images carefully, noting the distances involved, the elevation differences, and the limited sight lines available. The tactical challenge was enormous, engaging 12 separate targets from concealed positions while maintaining the element of surprise and ensuring that none of the targets could escape or activate defensive measures. The selection process for this mission will be based on demonstrated capability rather than seniority or previous rankings, Colonel Harrison announced. "We need the absolute best marksmen available regardless of other factors. Each recruit will be given the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities in a simulation that replicates the actual mission conditions." Thompson raised his hand. "Sir, what kind of timeline are we looking at for target engagement?" "Based on intelligence assessments, all 12 targets must be neutralized within a 4-minute window," Captain Davis replied. "Once the first shot is fired, the remaining targets will likely take defensive positions or attempt to flee. The simulation will test your ability to engage multiple targets rapidly while maintaining precision accuracy." The simulation parameters were outlined in detail. Recruits would engage targets positioned at various distances ranging from 400 to 1,200 yards, with elevation differences that required complex ballistic calculations. The targets would be programmed to react to gunfire by moving to cover positions, adding a time pressure element that hadn't been present in previous training exercises. "Wind conditions will be variable and unpredictable," Captain Davis explained. "Temperature variations throughout the target area will affect ballistic performance. You'll be engaging from multiple firing positions, which means rapid movement and repositioning while maintaining shooting accuracy." Maria absorbed every detail of the briefing, mentally cataloging the challenges involved. The mission requirements went beyond anything they had trained for, not just the technical demands of long-range precision shooting, but the psychological pressure of knowing that real lives depended on perfect performance. After the briefing, recruits were given 2 hours to prepare equipment and review the mission parameters. Most used this time to discuss strategy with other recruits or seek advice from instructors. Maria spent the time alone, studying topographical maps and calculating wind drift patterns. Based on the terrain features visible in the satellite imagery, she noticed details that others might have missed. Small variations in vegetation that indicated microclimates, rock formations that would create wind shadows, and elevation changes that would affect not just ballistic trajectories, but also the sequence in which targets could be engaged most effectively. Jennifer found Maria in the equipment room, methodically checking and adjusting her rifle scope. "Are you nervous?" Jennifer asked. "No," Maria replied honestly. "This is what all the training has been preparing us for. The only difference is that now it matters." "The other guys are saying this mission is impossible," Jennifer continued. 12 targets in 4 minutes with those distances and wind conditions. Thompson thinks they're setting us up to fail, so they can bring in more experienced snipers." Maria continued her equipment check without responding immediately. She had run the calculations multiple times, considering different firing sequences and repositioning requirements. The mission was certainly challenging, but not impossible if approached with the right strategy and executed with sufficient precision. "Thompson might be right about it being difficult," she finally said, "but difficult and impossible are different things." The simulation was scheduled to begin at 1400 hours, giving each recruit 30 minutes to complete the course. The order of participation would be determined by drawing lots, a process that would ensure fairness while adding another element of psychological pressure. As the morning progressed, tension among the recruits became increasingly evident. Some paced nervously, others engaged in obsessive equipment checks, and several formed small groups to discuss theoretical approaches to the mission challenges. The weight of potential real-world consequences had transformed the competitive atmosphere into something much more serious. Maria used the remaining time to practice breathing, techniques her grandfather had taught her, mental exercises designed to maintain calm focus under extreme pressure. She visualized the shooting sequence multiple times, considering variables and contingencies that might affect her performance. When Captain Davis announced that the simulation was ready to begin, 12 recruits lined up in the order determined by the lottery. Maria had drawn position number 8, which meant she would have the opportunity to observe several attempts before her turn while still having enough time to make adjustments based on what she learned. The first recruit to attempt the simulation was Jenkins, the former college athlete who had been considered one of the top performers throughout training. He approached the course with visible confidence, having spent considerable time discussing strategy with other recruits and instructors. The results would soon demonstrate just how challenging the mission parameters really were, and how much the selection process would depend on capabilities that went far beyond traditional measures of military readiness. Jenkins entered the simulation facility with the kind of swagger that had characterized his approach throughout training. The facility was an impressive technological achievement, a completely enclosed environment that could replicate any terrain or weather condition through advanced projection systems and environmental controls. The targets were sophisticated robotic systems that could move and react with human-like unpredictability. "Captain," Davis's voice crackled through the communication system as Jenkins took his position at the first firing point. "Simulation begins in 30 seconds. Remember, once you fire the first shot, the countdown timer starts. You have 4 minutes to neutralize all 12 targets." Maria watched through the observation window as Jenkins settled into his firing position. His form looked textbook perfect and his equipment preparation had been thorough. Everything about his approach suggested competence and confidence. The first shot rang out across the simulated mountain terrain. Jenkins had chosen to engage the closest target first, a logical strategy that many military manuals recommended. The target dropped immediately, a clean hit that earned approving nods from several observers. But then the complexity of the mission became apparent. As soon as the first shot echoed across the valley, the remaining 11 targets began moving toward cover positions. Some disappeared entirely behind buildings, while others took positions that would be extremely difficult to engage from Jenkins's current location. Jenkins fired his second shot less than 15 seconds later, but the target had already begun moving. The shot missed, striking the wall behind where the target had been positioned moments earlier. The pressure was now building rapidly. 10 targets remained, and valuable seconds had been lost. Moving to his second firing position, Jenkins began to struggle with the rapid repositioning required by the mission parameters. His larger frame, which had been an advantage during physical fitness training, now worked against him as he tried to quickly establish stable shooting positions in the cramped confines of the simulated terrain. His third shot connected, dropping another target, but by now more than 90 seconds had elapsed. The remaining targets had settled into defensive positions that required extremely precise shooting from difficult angles. Jenkins managed 2 more hits over the next minute, but several shots missed entirely as he rushed to beat the 4-minute deadline. When the simulation ended, Jenkins had successfully engaged 5 targets out of 12. His face showed a mixture of frustration and disbelief as he exited the facility. Throughout training, he had never failed so completely at any exercise. Martinez went next, approaching the simulation with a more systematic strategy. Having observed Jenkins's attempt, he decided to begin with the most difficult targets while they were still in exposed positions. This approach proved more successful initially. His first 3 shots all connected, dropping targets at ranges exceeding 900 yards. However, Martinez encountered different problems as the simulation progressed. His methodical approach, while more accurate, was also slower. By the time he had engaged 6 targets, only 40 seconds remained on the countdown timer. The time pressure forced him to rush his final shots, resulting in several misses that left 4 targets still active when time expired. Thompson's attempt was perhaps the most telling. Despite his vocal confidence throughout training and his frequent criticism of other recruits' abilities, he struggled from the very beginning of the simulation. His first shot missed entirely, apparently due to a miscalculation of wind drift across the valley. The miss seemed to shake his confidence, and his subsequent shots showed increasing signs of pressure and doubt. Thompson managed to hit only 3 targets during his 4-minute window, spending too much time second-guessing his calculations and adjusting his equipment between shots. As recruit after recruit failed to successfully complete the simulation, the atmosphere in the observation area grew increasingly tense. Williams, who had been considered one of the most promising candidates, managed 7 hits but struggled with the rapid repositioning required between firing points. Foster hit 6 targets but ran out of time, when he became fixated on one particularly difficult shot and spent nearly a minute trying to find the perfect firing solution. By the time the 7th recruit had completed his attempt, the best performance had been Martinez's 6 successful engagements. Several instructors were quietly discussing whether the mission parameters were realistic or whether they needed to bring in more experienced snipers from active duty units. Maria's name was called just as these discussions were beginning to intensify. She walked toward the simulation entrance with the same quiet confidence she had shown throughout training, carrying her equipment with the careful precision that had become her trademark. Captain Davis watched her approach with particular interest. Throughout the training program, Maria's performances had been consistently impressive, but always in ways that seemed to surprise people. Her small stature and quiet demeanor continued to create doubt about her capabilities, even among instructors who had witnessed her exceptional marksmanship skills. "Santos, you've observed 7 attempts now," Captain Davis said as she prepared to enter the simulation. "Any thoughts on strategy?" "Yes, sir," Maria replied simply. "I think most people are approaching this as a shooting problem, when it's actually a movement and timing problem." This response caught the attention of Colonel Harrison, who had been watching the simulation attempts with growing concern about mission feasibility. "Explain what you mean by that." Maria gestured toward the topographical display showing the simulated terrain. "The shooting distances aren't actually that challenging for anyone who's made it this far in training. The difficulty is in the sequence and timing of engagements, combined with movement between positions. Most people are trying to shoot their way through the problem instead of thinking about how to position themselves to make the shots as simple as possible." Her analysis was accurate, though none of the previous recruits had articulated the challenge in those terms. Jenkins and Thompson had focused primarily on their shooting technique, while Martinez and Williams had concentrated on target priorities without considering how their movement patterns affected their shooting opportunities. "The targets are reacting predictably to gunfire," Maria continued. "They're moving to predetermined cover positions based on the location of incoming fire. If you understand their movement patterns, you can position yourself to engage them as they move rather than trying to dig them out of their defensive positions." Colonel Harrison exchanged glances with Captain Davis. Maria's assessment showed a level of tactical thinking that went beyond basic marksmanship skills. She was analyzing the mission as a complex problem with multiple interdependent variables, rather than simply a test of shooting accuracy. "You have 4 minutes. Santos, Captain Davis announced as she entered the simulation facility. "Good luck." The massive doors closed behind her with a solid thump that echoed through the artificial mountain valley. Maria found herself standing in what appeared to be actual mountainous terrain, complete with realistic wind, changing light conditions, and the distant sounds of a functioning military compound. She spent the first 30 seconds of her allotted preparation time simply observing and listening, noting wind patterns, identifying the optimal sequence of firing positions, and confirming her understanding of target locations based on the intelligence briefing. When she finally settled into her first firing position, Maria's approach was notably different from everything the observers had seen previously. Instead of rushing to engage the closest target, she had positioned herself to take advantage of sight lines that would allow her to engage multiple targets without extensive repositioning. Maria's first shot came as a complete surprise to everyone watching. Instead of engaging the closest target, as every previous recruit had done, she aimed at a target positioned nearly 1,100 yards away in what appeared to be an impossible shooting position. The target was partially concealed behind a concrete barrier, with only a small portion visible through a narrow gap between buildings. The shot was perfect. The distant target dropped immediately, and Maria was already transitioning to her second target before the sound of the first shot had finished echoing across the valley. Her movement was fluid and efficient, unlike the frantic repositioning that had characterized previous attempts. Her second shot came less than 8 seconds after the first, engaging another distant target before it could reach full cover. This target was moving when she fired, requiring her to lead the shot perfectly to compensate for both the target's movement and the extended bullet flight time over the long distance. Captain Davis leaned forward in the observation booth, studying the tactical display that showed Maria's positioning and target selection. Her approach was unlike anything they had seen during training or in the previous simulation attempts. She was engaging targets in an order that seemed random, but was actually based on a sophisticated understanding of how the remaining targets would react to each shot. "She's hurting them," Colonel Harrison muttered, recognition dawning in his voice. "She's using the target's programmed responses to drive them into positions where she can engage them more easily." This insight proved accurate as Maria's third and fourth shots demonstrated her strategy in action. By eliminating specific targets in a calculated sequence, she was forcing the remaining targets to move into predictable patterns that brought them into sight lines from her carefully chosen firing positions. Her third shot dropped a target that had been coordinating the defensive response of 3 other targets. With that target eliminated, the remaining 3 moved to alternative positions that exposed them to Maria's current firing position. Her fourth shot came immediately after the third, engaging one of these newly exposed targets before it could complete its movement to cover. The observers watched in amazement as Maria continued to execute her plan with mechanical precision. Her movements between firing positions were economical and purposeful, never wasting motion or time. Where other recruits had struggled with the physical demands of rapid repositioning, Maria's smaller frame and superior conditioning allowed her to move through the terrain like she was flowing water. Her fifth shot required her to engage a target positioned behind partial cover, with only the target's head and shoulders visible through a window opening. The shot required perfect precision to avoid hitting the window frame, while still ensuring a clean hit on the target. Maria's bullet passed through the opening with millimeters to spare, dropping the target instantly. By this point, less than 90 seconds had elapsed, and Maria had successfully engaged 5 targets without a single miss. The tactical display showed that the remaining 7 targets were now scattered across defensive positions that would have been extremely difficult for previous recruits to engage effectively. But Maria's strategy had accounted for this situation. Her 6th shot came from a position that most observers hadn't even noticed her reaching: a narrow firing lane between 2 buildings that provided sight lines to 3 different target positions. The shot dropped the 6th target, and Maria was already adjusting her aim for the 7th before the 6th had finished falling. Her 7th shot was perhaps the most impressive yet. The target was positioned behind cover that seemed to provide complete protection from her current firing position. However, Maria had identified a ricochet opportunity, a shot that would bounce off a metal surface and strike the target from an unexpected angle. The physics involved in calculating such a shot were extraordinarily complex, requiring her to account for the bullet's trajectory, the angle of the reflecting surface, and the target's exact position behind cover. The shot worked perfectly. The bullet struck the metal surface at precisely the calculated angle, deflected toward the target's position, and eliminated the seventh target with a hit that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Thompson, watching from the observation area, couldn't contain his disbelief. "That's impossible," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "Nobody makes shots like that. There has to be something wrong with the simulation." Captain Davis silenced him with a sharp look, but Thompson's comments reflected the thoughts of several other observers. Maria's performance was so far beyond what anyone had expected that it was challenging their assumptions about what was possible within the parameters of the mission. Maria's eighth shot came from her third firing position, engaging a target that had taken refuge in what appeared to be a completely protected location. Again, she had identified details that others had missed. In this case, a gap in the target's cover that was only visible from a specific angle and distance. Her shot threaded through this gap with surgical precision. The ninth target fell less than 30 seconds later. Maria had moved to a position that provided her with a clean shot at a target that previous recruits hadn't even attempted to engage. The target was positioned at the maximum effective range of her equipment, nearly 1,200 yards away, and the shot required her to compensate for significant wind drift and bullet drop. Her calculation was flawless. The shot struck the target center mass, eliminating the ninth threat, with the kind of precision that seasoned snipers achieved only occasionally during their careers. With 3 targets remaining and nearly 2 minutes still available on the countdown timer, Maria had already exceeded the best previous performance by a significant margin. But rather than rushing to finish the mission, she took additional time to ensure that her final 3 shots would be executed with the same precision as the first 9. Her 10th shot eliminated a target that had been moving between covered positions, trying to reach a location that would have provided complete protection. Maria's timing was perfect. Her shot reached the target during the brief moment when it was exposed while transitioning between cover positions. The 11th target required her to make the longest shot of the simulation. A target positioned at the absolute maximum range of the scenario, nearly 1,250 yards away in challenging wind conditions. Maria spent nearly 30 seconds calculating the ballistic solution, accounting for every variable that could affect the shot's trajectory. When she finally fired, the shot seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, before striking the distant target with devastating accuracy. The observers could hardly believe what they were witnessing. 11 consecutive hits, at ranges and under conditions that were pushing the limits of both equipment and human capability. 1 target remained, and Maria still had more than 40 seconds left on the countdown timer. The final target had taken position in the most protected location available, behind multiple layers of cover that seemed to make engagement impossible from any of the established firing positions. But Maria had been saving this target for last precisely because she had identified a solution that no one else would have considered. Moving to a position that hadn't been used by any previous recruit, she established a firing angle that required her to thread her shot through multiple openings in sequence, a ballistic problem that required calculating not just the target's position, but the precise alignment of several intermediate obstacles. The shot was the culmination of everything she had learned from her grandfather, everything she had absorbed during training, and every instinct she had developed about reading terrain and understanding complex ballistic environments. When she squeezed the trigger, Maria knew with absolute certainty that the shot would find its target. The 12th target dropped with 28 seconds remaining on the countdown timer, completing a perfect performance that no one had believed was possible. The simulation facility fell completely silent as the final target dropped. For several seconds, the only sound was the artificial wind generated by the environmental systems and the distant electronic hum of the monitoring equipment. Maria remained in her firing position, motionless as if she were still tracking potential targets. Captain Davis stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 12 targets, 12 hits, completion time of 3 minutes and 32 seconds. In 15 years of military service, including multiple combat deployments, he had never witnessed marksmanship of this caliber. The performance wasn't just exceptional, it was beyond what he had believed was humanly possible under these conditions. Colonel Harrison broke the silence first. "Replay the sequence," he ordered, his voice tight with amazement. "I want to see every shot again with ballistic analysis and timing calculations." The replay began immediately on the large tactical display. Each shot was analyzed in detail, showing bullet trajectory, wind compensation, target movement patterns, and the complex geometric calculations required for the ricochet shot and the final threading maneuver. The data confirmed what everyone had witnessed. Every shot had been executed with mathematical precision. "Sir?" The technician operating the simulation systems spoke up hesitantly. "I've checked all the equipment calibration twice. The simulation was operating within normal parameters. No malfunctions, no system errors. This performance is legitimate." Thompson stood abruptly from his seat in the observation area. "This is impossible," he declared loudly. "Nobody shoots like that. There has to be some kind of mistake or equipment malfunction. I demand a review of the simulation data." Captain Davis turned to face Thompson with an expression that could have melted steel. "Are you questioning the integrity of our training systems, recruit?" "Sir, I'm saying that what we just watched defies every standard of marksmanship training I've ever seen," Thompson replied, his voice rising. "Santos has never demonstrated this level of capability during any previous exercise. There's no way she suddenly developed supernatural shooting abilities." Maria emerged from the simulation facility at that moment, carrying her equipment with the same quiet efficiency she had shown throughout the exercise. Her expression was calm and focused, showing no signs of excitement or triumph. She simply walked to the equipment check station and began the standard post-exercise procedures. "Santos," Colonel Harrison called out. "Approach the observation station." Maria walked over with measured steps, standing at attention in front of the senior officers. Her uniform was barely disheveled despite the intensive movement requirements of the simulation, and her breathing was steady and controlled. "That was an extraordinary performance," Colonel Harrison said, studying her carefully. 12 targets in 3 minutes and 32 seconds, including shots that required ballistic calculations beyond standard training parameters. "How do you explain this level of precision?" "Sir, I applied the training you provided and the techniques my grandfather taught me," Maria replied simply. "The simulation presented a tactical problem with specific parameters. I analyzed those parameters and developed a solution that addressed the mission requirements." "Your grandfather?" Captain Davis asked, intrigued by this reference. "Sergeant Major Eduardo Santos, retired," Maria responded. "He served as a sniper instructor for special operations units for 12 years before his retirement. He began training me when I was 8 years old." This information explained much about Maria's capabilities, but it also raised new questions about why her background hadn't been fully documented in her training records. Captain Davis made a mental note to review her personnel file more thoroughly. Thompson wasn't finished with his protests. "Even if she had family training, what we just witnessed goes beyond normal human capabilities. I think there's been some kind of simulation error or manipulation." "Are you suggesting that Recruit Santos somehow cheated during a controlled simulation exercise?" Colonel Harrison asked, his tone dangerous. "I'm suggesting that something abnormal occurred," Thompson insisted. "Maybe equipment malfunction, maybe computer error, maybe someone modified the simulation parameters. All I know is that what we just watched isn't possible for someone who's been struggling with basic physical fitness requirements throughout training." Maria listened to this exchange without changing expression, but Captain Davis noticed a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested controlled anger. He decided to address Thompson's accusations directly. "The simulation data is recorded and monitored by 3 independent systems," Captain Davis explained coldly. "Every shot is tracked by ballistic sensors, target hit confirmation is verified by multiple detection methods, and all equipment is calibrated before and after each exercise. If you're suggesting fraud or malfunction, you're questioning the integrity of systems that have been used to train thousands of military personnel." Furthermore, Colonel Harrison added, "Recruit Santos's performance was observed by 12 qualified military personnel through direct visual confirmation, in addition to the electronic monitoring systems. Are you suggesting that all of these individuals were somehow mistaken about what they witnessed?" Thompson fell silent, realizing that his accusations were putting him in an increasingly difficult position. However, his discomfort was shared by several other recruits who were struggling to reconcile Maria's exceptional performance with their preconceptions about her capabilities. Jenkins raised his hand tentatively. Sir, could we review Santos's previous training scores? I'm not questioning the simulation results, but I'd like to understand how this level of performance relates to her previous exercises. Captain Davis pulled up Maria's training records on the main display. The data showed consistent high performance in marksmanship exercises, with scores that were always above average, but never dramatically exceptional. Her physical fitness scores were indeed below average in most categories, but her technical scores in ballistics calculation, equipment maintenance, and tactical analysis were consistently superior. What this data shows, Captain Davis explained, is a recruit who has been performing well within her capabilities during training exercises, but who may not have been fully demonstrating those capabilities. Santos, were you holding back during previous exercises? Not holding back, sir, Maria replied. But I wasn't pushing to maximum capability either. My grandfather taught me that you should never reveal your full potential unless the situation absolutely requires it. This philosophy explained much about Maria's training performance. She had been learning and improving throughout the program, while maintaining a consistent level of demonstrated capability that kept her progressing without attracting excessive attention. Well, the situation now absolutely requires maximum capability, Colonel Harrison declared. Based on this performance, I'm recommending Santos for immediate advancement to operational status. This mission will proceed with her as the primary sniper. The announcement created a stir among the assembled personnel. Advancing directly from training to operational missions was extremely rare, typically reserved for individuals with prior military experience or exceptional circumstances. Sir, Captain Davis interjected, while Santos's performance was extraordinary, she still lacks field experience. Shouldn't we consider additional training or mentorship before deployment? Captain, we have a narrow window for this operation, and we've just witnessed the only performance that meets mission requirements, Colonel Harrison replied firmly. Santos has demonstrated both the technical capability and the mental discipline required for this mission. Additional training won't improve her marksmanship, and field experience is exactly what she'll gain by completing this operation successfully. Maria remained at attention throughout this discussion, but her mind was processing the implications rapidly. She had entered the simulation, hoping to prove herself worthy of advancement in the training program. Instead, she had demonstrated capabilities that were launching her directly into active military operations. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but it was also exactly what she had been preparing for throughout her life. Her grandfather's training, the months of military preparation, and her own dedication to excellence had brought her to this moment. Santos, Colonel Harrison addressed her directly. Do you feel prepared to undertake this mission? Yes, sir, Maria replied without hesitation. I'm ready to serve. The transformation in how others viewed her was already beginning. The mockery and doubt that had characterized her training experience were being replaced by a mixture of respect, amazement, and in some cases, resentment, from those who couldn't accept that their assumptions had been so completely wrong. The mission briefing for the actual operation took place 6 hours after Maria's simulation performance. The room was filled with personnel she had never seen before: special operations officers, intelligence analysts, communication specialists, and mission planners whose presence indicated the critical importance of the upcoming operation. Word of Maria's simulation performance had spread throughout the base with remarkable speed. As she walked through the corridors to the briefing room, conversations stopped and personnel turned to watch her pass. The quiet recruit who had been dismissed and mocked was now the center of intense attention and speculation. General Patricia Morrison, commander of special operations for the entire theater, conducted the final briefing personally. Her presence alone indicated that this mission had the highest possible priority, and that failure was not considered an option. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation has evolved rapidly since our initial briefing, General Morrison began. Intelligence sources confirm that the terrorist cell is accelerating their timeline. We now have less than 18 hours before they complete preparations for a major attack that could result in hundreds of civilian casualties. The updated intelligence showed that the compound had increased security measures and that several additional high-value targets had arrived during the past 24 hours. The mission parameters had grown even more challenging. 16 targets now needed to be eliminated, and the time window for engagement had been reduced to 3 minutes. Based on the simulation results and demonstrated capabilities, Specialist Santos will serve as the primary sniper for this operation, General Morrison announced. Supporting personnel will provide reconnaissance, communications, and extraction support, but the success of this mission depends entirely on her performance in the field. Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. 16 lives hung in the balance, along with the lives of the civilians who would be targeted if the mission failed. The simulation had been impressive, but this was real combat with real consequences. The mission launched at 200 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for the insertion team. Maria was transported to the operational area by helicopter, along with a small support team that would establish communication links and provide emergency extraction if needed. The actual terrain was even more challenging than the simulation had suggested. Wind patterns were unpredictable due to the mountainous geography, and the elevation changes created complex ballistic problems that required constant recalculation. Temperature variations throughout the target area added another layer of difficulty to an already complex mission. Maria established her primary firing position on a rocky outcrop that provided sight lines to the entire compound while keeping her completely concealed from enemy observation. The position required her to remain motionless for nearly 2 hours while waiting for the optimal engagement window. As dawn approached, intelligence confirmed that all 16 targets were present in the compound and that the attack preparations were nearing completion. The mission was cleared to proceed, and Maria began the most important work of her life. Her first shot came at exactly 612 hours, engaging the target who served as the cell's communications coordinator. The elimination of this target prevented any warning from being sent to other terrorist cells or sleeper agents who might have been standing by to execute backup plans. The subsequent 15 shots unfolded with the same precision she had demonstrated during the simulation, but with the added pressure of knowing that each target eliminated was preventing actual terrorist attacks against innocent civilians. Her movements between firing positions were fluid and efficient, and her calculations accounted for the constantly changing environmental conditions. The mission was completed in 2 minutes and 47 seconds, with all 16 targets eliminated without a single civilian casualty or any damage to nearby structures. The precision required for this achievement was beyond what most military planners had considered possible, even with the most advanced equipment and extensive planning. When the extraction helicopter arrived to retrieve Maria and the support team, the pilot found her calmly cleaning her equipment while maintaining watch over the now quiet compound. Her demeanor was professional and focused, showing no signs of excitement or stress despite having just completed one of the most challenging sniper missions in recent military history. The debriefing session that followed was attended by senior military officials from multiple branches of service. Maria's performance was analyzed in detail, with particular attention to the techniques and calculations that had enabled such exceptional precision under combat conditions. Specialist Santos, your performance today prevented a terrorist attack that intelligence sources indicate would have targeted a civilian airport during peak travel hours, General Morrison informed her during the debriefing. Conservative estimates suggest that your actions today saved between 300 and 500 innocent lives. The recognition that followed was immediate and comprehensive. Maria was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for exceptional heroism in combat operations, making her one of the youngest recipients in the award's history. Her simulation performance was officially recognized as setting new standards for precision marksmanship training, and her tactics were incorporated into advanced sniper training programs. More importantly for Maria personally, the respect of her peers was complete and unqualified. Thompson, who had been so vocal in his doubts about her capabilities, approached her after the award ceremony with a formal apology. "Santos, I was wrong about you," he said, extending his hand. "I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I'm sorry for the disrespect I showed you during training." "Thank you," Maria replied, accepting his handshake. "But you weren't entirely wrong. I did struggle with some aspects of training. The difference is that I focused on developing my strengths while working to improve my weaknesses, rather than assuming that current performance determines future potential." Jennifer, who had remained supportive throughout Maria's challenges, was promoted to advanced training programs largely based on her association with Maria's success and her own demonstrated capabilities. Their friendship had proven that supporting others' success often leads to recognition of your own value. Captain Davis was reassigned to develop new training protocols based on the techniques and approaches that Maria had demonstrated. Her methods of analyzing complex tactical problems and developing unconventional solutions became standard elements of advanced sniper training. Perhaps most significantly, Maria's story became part of military training curricula, as an example of how talent and dedication can overcome initial disadvantages and social prejudices. Her grandfather's philosophy of patient preparation and hidden capabilities was studied and incorporated into leadership development programs. 6 months after the mission, Maria was assigned to train new recruits in advanced marksmanship techniques. Standing before a group of trainees that included several individuals who clearly doubted whether someone her size could teach them anything valuable, she smiled and remembered her grandfather's words about letting people underestimate you. "Before we begin," she announced to the assembled recruits, "I want you to understand something important. Your success in this program won't be determined by your size, your background, or what other people think about your potential. It will be determined by your willingness to learn, your dedication to improvement, and your ability to perform when it matters most." She paused, looking at each recruit individually. Some of you may be surprised to learn that the instructor standing before you was considered one of the weakest recruits in her training class. I was mocked, dismissed, and told that I didn't belong in this program. What changed wasn't my physical capabilities or my background. What changed was the opportunity to prove what I could accomplish when the mission truly mattered. The transformation in the recruits' expressions was immediate and obvious. Several who had been slouching in their chairs sat up straighter, and those who had been whispering among themselves fell silent and focused their attention entirely on her words. "Today, we're going to learn that exceptional performance isn't about meeting other people's expectations," Maria continued. "It's about exceeding your own limitations and discovering capabilities you didn't know you possessed. By the end of this training program, some of you will accomplish things that you currently believe are impossible." Looking out at the faces of the new recruits, Maria saw herself as she had been months earlier, determined, capable but unrecognized and underestimated. She knew that among these trainees were individuals who would face the same doubts and challenges she had overcome, and that her responsibility was to help them discover their own potential for excellence. The girl who had been mocked by all had become the instructor who would ensure that talent and dedication were recognized regardless of initial appearances or social prejudices. Her record-breaking performance had not only saved lives, but had also changed how the military evaluated and developed exceptional capabilities in all its personnel.